As a country where annual tourists now outnumber residents 3 to 1, Iceland has become a crazy popular destination that's on practically everybody's bucket list.
This November, we spent 3 weeks circumnavigating the entire country to find out whether it really lives up to all that hype.
Most people don't want to share the bad parts of their vacations, and everything on social media makes Iceland out to be a total paradise. But in this video, we're going to be brutally honest about our recent trip and make sure you know the whole truth about Iceland before visiting there yourself.
Don't worry though, we picked up a ton of tricks along the way that are guaranteed to make sure your vacation doesn't suck.
Pretty much everybody enters Iceland and Reykjavik and makes it their home base. That's exactly how our trip started out. There's tons of stuff to do in Iceland's capital, from shops and museums to restaurants and nightlife, and there are a million different day trips you can take around this area. One of our favorite excursions from Reykjavik was visiting Thingvellir National Park, where you can take in the Godafoss Waterfall, as seen in Game of Thrones, and stare down into the fault line between the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates. Because there's so many convenient things you can do within striking distance of Reykjavik, most people on a typical 3 to 7 day trip have a nice time here and never actually go much further. But here's the problem. We stayed a lot longer than that, and when we eventually drove around the entire island, we looked back and realized that Reykjavik and the surrounding areas were the least interesting parts of the whole country. Like, for example, we ended up going to all of Iceland's national parks on this trip, and the one we just mentioned actually ranked dead last. So our #1 tip for your trip to Iceland is get as far from Reykjavik as you can, as soon as possible. It just gets better.
Our first stop as we inched our way out of the city's grasp was the Snaefellsnes Peninsula, which contains Snaefellsjokull National Park and is home to rugged sea cliffs, a volcanic crater you can hike to the top of, and wild seals hanging out on black sand beaches. The crowds here thinned out a little bit compared to Reykjavik, but we were definitely still in tourist land. With that said, the level of services like gas, groceries, and even bathrooms fell off quickly as we left the capital region. So our second tip is to stock up on supplies before you venture far from Reykjavik, because the rest of the country is pretty unpopulated. From here, we followed Iceland's ring road clockwise and really started to feel everything open up. We could finally drive for kilometers without seeing another car, and we knew the best parts of our trip were on the horizon.
Heading to our apartment near Lagar, we stopped to check out Godafoss, which was the most spectacular waterfall of our entire journey. That same night, while Stephen was driving, I looked out my window and spotted the Northern Lights. We pulled off immediately, and one of the most magical moments of our whole trip happened all alone on the side of the road. But as magical as this moment was, the truth is, it didn't happen by accident. If the Northern Lights are on your bucket list too, here's what you need to know. First off, you really have to visit as close to winter and as far away from city lights as possible to get the best chance of seeing the Aurora. While that makes for a way colder and slightly less convenient trip, the upshot is that both of those things do help keep you away from crowds. Next, you're gonna have to put in a little work and keep an eye on a site like auroraforecast.is. You're looking for a high KP index, high solar wind speed, and a strongly negative BZ, or magnetic field strength. You'll also need a clear view of the sky. Less clouds is better. Lastly, the lights don't always just flash before your eyes. It helps to use a digital camera to spot them. Cameras are more sensitive than the human eye, which means you'll notice them on your screen before you can see them in real life. And I'm gonna be real with you here. We stayed 20 days, looked every night, and spotted the Aurora 3 times, which I was super happy about. But think about the math. If you're only staying a long weekend, there's a good chance you won't see them at all. And just so you know, booking a Northern Lights tour won't magically make them appear.
Since we were chasing the Aurora on this trip, we visited in November, when Iceland only gets 5 to 8 hours of sunlight each day. So we ended up with a lot of time to kill at night. Make sure you have a plan for what to do with that time. For example, we spent one night at the Mývatn Hot Springs, one of about a zillion geothermally heated pools across Iceland. Our next stop on the ring road was Fjords Geothermal Park, which is like a mini version of Yellowstone. And this brings us to something else you have to have a plan for: unbearable weather. At this stop, we paid for parking, tried to walk around in the 50-mile-an-hour wind, and pretty much immediately said nope. Honestly, a lot of our days were randomly ruined by rain or a level of eyeball freezing cold that was just unsurvivable for 2 people from Florida. The bottom line here is that you need to pre-plan some indoor backup experiences, because Iceland's weather is kind of sketchy year-round. And if you visit in the summer to try to beat the cold, you'll just be replacing it with long lines and crowds during peak tourist season. There's not really a perfect time to go. Anyway, from there we continued on to the East Fjords, where the ring road hugs the craggy coastline to give you a front seat view of the best Iceland has to offer. These were by far some of the most impressive landscapes we took in on our entire trip. We rounded the southeastern coast to come face to face with the #1 national park in the country, Vatnajokull, which is home to the largest glacier in Europe. Our favorite part of the park was visiting the Jökulsárlón Glacier Lagoon and watching the icebergs break apart on the black sands of Diamond Beach. It's almost the furthest you can get from Reykjavik, and it's absolutely worth the trip. One of our biggest tips is don't leave Iceland without making the journey around the East Coast. As amazing as this part of our trip was though, I'd be lying if I said it was all sunshine and rainbows. The wind almost ripped our car door off, and we bailed on a waterfall hike because temperatures just shouldn't have negative signs in front of them.
Making our way back towards civilization along the Ring Road, we stopped in Vik, another popular destination for tourists, although we sort of struggled to see why. We grabbed a bite to eat and a coffee, but heading back into town after where we'd just been was kind of a letdown. Even as we entered into the more populated areas though, the one thing we continued to notice on our trip was a lack of big corporate hotel brands. Almost everywhere we stayed was a privately owned guest house, apartment, or cabin. Most of them were really nice, but we did discover that a lot of beds in Iceland are twin size. And even when you book a king bed, it's sometimes just two twins pushed together. Consistently across 9 different properties, we found Icelandic bedding to be surprisingly uncomfortable. If you're used to American hotels, our advice is to bring a really nice blanket and pillow with you, or just buy one on the first day of your trip. By the way, those places weren't cheap, and neither was anything else either. We recently did the math and figured out that this was our most expensive vacation of all time per day. That's no surprise because Iceland had the 3rd highest cost of living of any country in the world in 2024. With that said, according to other travel blogs, we actually spent about 50% less than the average tourist thanks to some clever hacks. For an in-depth list of our money tips for Iceland, check out the links in the video description.
Making our way back to Reykjavik, we took another detour off the Ring Road to see the Golden Circle, a collection of touristy hotspots along the Loop Road. There are a ton of guided tours available to explore this area, but it's actually pretty easy to do yourself. So if you're gonna book a tour, make sure you get one that lets you experience something that's impossible to do on your own. For example, one of the only good ways to hike on a glacier or explore an ice cave is with an official guide. So that's exactly what we did at Langjökull with Sleipnir Glacier Tours, a company that operates gigantic monster buses that look like they're built to survive the zombie apocalypse. It was definitely fun, but again, the weather's what killed us. Not only was our tour rescheduled, but the ice cave portion had to be canceled altogether. At the end of the day, just setting realistic expectations is the #1 thing you can do to have a better time in Iceland. If we'd seen more videos like this one instead of polished influencer posts before going, I think we would have experienced less disappointment and had an easier time just rolling with the punches. If you appreciate the honesty, don't forget to hit the like button on this video and subscribe for more. If you like this kind of stuff, don't forget to subscribe or follow along on your favorite social media platform.